hitting the button.
What is the Minnesota's path to glory in 2025? Well, I've done it. I've figured out the ultimate path for the Minnesota Vikings to maximize what their 2025 season and beyond can be. And I'm sure everybody will love and agree with it. Strap in. We're going to talk about that and the latest news in the Vikings roster building here on the Real Forno Show.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Real Forno Show, hosted by the one and only Tyler Forness. A to Z Sports sought him out to be their Minnesota Vikings reporter and NFL analyst. And he's a proud contributor over at SKOL North's Purple Daily. Tyler is also the captivating host of The Good, The Bad, and The Hungry on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network, and a founding member of Vikings First and SKOL.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Real Forno Show. I'm your host, Tyler Forness. With me, as always, in the top left corner, he's producer Dave. Dave, how are you, my friend?
Cold.
How cold is it there?
When I got up this morning, it was 19 and wind chill at 2. Now, it obviously does not compare to Minnesota, but for Texas, that is freaking cold.
Oh, I'm sure it is. I am sure it is. And we're going to have a little bit of fun here tonight. It is ice cold outside. And quite frankly, I don't care because the takes are hot. And I have constructed my ideal scenario for the Minnesota Vikings. Now, when I mean ideal scenario, I mean realistic. I'm not just going to play Madden and give us all the great free agents. I am being calculated in kind of how I put this thing together. The Vikings aren't going to sign 6 or 7 huge free agents. That's just not going to happen. I have narrowed it down to, I believe I have 3 long-term deals for free agents, which is similar to what they did last year. Jonathan Gennard, Blake Cashman were the 2 they got more than 2-year deals. Andrew Van Ginkel got a 2-year deal, but they were very calculated in how they made those moves. And I think they're going to continue to do that in 2025. One of the big things for me when kind of taking a look at the Minnesota Vikings as I get the article ready to go, they have an interesting situation. And they got some good news here earlier today where the salary cap has gone up anywhere from like $6 to $10 million. And Dan Graziano ended up getting his hands on the memo talking about it. But essentially, money was allocated and it is coming back on the salary cap. So the salary cap is projected right now to be between $277 and $281.5 million. That means the Vikings are projected to have between $61 and $65 million in cap space instead of the current 56.3 we had at the beginning of the day. Over the cap was real quick to update that. And good for them. That's the kind of stuff we love to see. And look, this is good for the Vikings. And one of the things that I was asked earlier today is, well, if this is good for the Vikings, isn't it good for every team? Yes, it is good for every team. But good is relative. And you can kind of look at this from an economic standpoint. If a poor person is given $10,000, it's going to impact them, but they're probably going to have to use it in a different way than if a rich person gets $10,000. The rich person can just be like, oh, let's just fly to Paris right now. The poor person's probably going to have to be a little smarter with their money, put some into savings, pay off some bills, that kind of thing. And this is kind of the direct analogy you can use with the National Football League. If you are $10 million over the cap, that gets you closer to being under the cap. It does not give you an advantage in signing free agents. And that's where the Vikings get a bigger advantage than some other teams. They have $56 million in cap space going into this. So now they have even more cap space to play with, and that's going to give them more flexibility to do the things they want. If they want to go get a Trey Smith, they have extra money to go and get that, and they can throw their weight around in doing so. Those things matter. They factor in when you're having those conversations in the free agent market. So the Vikings have a bigger advantage than, say, the Buffalo Bills, who are now just closer to being underneath the salary cap. So that's a good thing. And I think that should be really exciting for the Vikings. And you know what? They're not going to get everybody, but they're going to be able to do some real damage. But it's how they get to that damage. And then the other factor that we have to talk about, Dave, Byron Murphy Jr. His void date was moved. There's been a lot of scuttlebutt about, well, should they maybe franchise tag Byron Murphy Jr.? I wrote about it and I thought it was a smarter move. Well, unfortunately, they can't do that anymore because they moved back the void date. Unlike a contract restructure, Dave, contract restructure can go without the player ever having to agree to it. Why? Because all it does is give the player their money earlier. That's it. No player's going to say no. You're basically giving them guaranteed money. This is different. The Vikings had to go to Byron Murphy Jr. and ask to move that void date back. So in return, the concession point was, well, I don't want to be franchise tagged. That doesn't necessarily mean that Byron Murphy Jr. won't come back, but it is evident he wants to test the market. And good for him. He should want to test the market. That's a good business decision for Byron Murphy. And at the end of the day, that's all Byron Murphy needs to worry about. What's good for his business? So now they can't franchise tag him, but they still can franchise tag Sam Darnold because they allowed his contract to void and Stephon Gilmore's contract to void. Gilmore's was going to void no matter what. I don't think if they bring him back, they might still bring him back, but it's so minimal, it doesn't matter that much. Darnold's is $5 million. That's a somewhat significant number. Now it's only like 2% of the cap, but it's like 2% of the cap. That's a lot of money. So I don't think that necessarily factors in on if he's going to stay or not. Personally, I don't think the Vikings have made that decision yet. I think they're going to make that decision when the combine hits, when they start talking to agents, when they start talking to other teams. And then they're going to decide, hey, do we want to bring back Sam Darnold? Is it worth it to bring back Sam Darnold from a financial standpoint? Can we trade him if we tag him? And what are we going to get? Are there going to be multiple teams that are bidding on him? I think these are all questions that have yet to be answered. And I think we're going to get those answers here moving forward, but we're not going to get them yet. And I think that's a really important factor here. I'm intrigued to see what they do, but that question will be answered in my Path of Glory. And if you've never heard of the term Path of Glory before, it is a term that was coined by some friends of mine at Voices of Wrestling, Joe Lanza and Rich Craich of the Flagship Podcast. If you love pro wrestling, go check it out. It's one of the best in the world. But the idea is, well, on WrestleMania weekend, there's a bunch of independent shows, and the goal is to see as many good shows as you can. So Joe Lanza would always create the Path of Glory. What's going to give you the best wrestling weekend you can get? So I decided to borrow that term, and here's my Path of Glory. What I think the Vikings will end up doing, and it's also from an optimal standpoint. It's kind of a cross between what I'd like to see happen, what is realistic, and what I think will happen. So you're not going to see like Trey Smith, Milton Williams, and Charvarius Ward. No, you're not going to see that. You're going to see more calculated moves. And they do spend money. And I'll have an article out Thursday morning to kind of break it all down. It's got some salary cap numbers in there. And I'll update you guys as we go along, because I think the salary cap is a really important element to this whole discussion. But there are some really interesting things that they can do. And I think we should start here. What I have done is I have identified all of the Vikings' needs by position. The Vikings need at least one quarterback. They need 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers, a tight end, an offensive tackle, 2 interior offensive linemen, 2 edge rushers, 2 defensive tackles, an inside linebacker, 2 safeties, and 4 corners. Now, how dire you believe those needs are is going to be up to your own interpretation. How important those needs are is going to be up to your interpretation as well. But I think the positions themselves aren't really up to interpretation, because I think they're pretty, like, even if you don't think it's a big need, like wide receiver, you still need bodies for wide receiver 4 and 5, which you do not have right now. And that's where kind of the needs. And I think being able to kind of understand what the needs are and then focus forward from there is a really good thought process here with how we're going to handle this. And Dave, is there anything that I mentioned here that you think I did not include?
The fact that with the cap going up, I saw a tweet from Mike Sando today. Do you remember where you were when the NFL raised the cap by $31 million in 2024?
I think I was sitting on my couch with Odie.
Okay. Well, I don't remember. But the salary cap isn't the issue. Finding good players is the issue.
Yeah.
It never changes. Now, when you talk about, well, we got a few more million to spend, a lot of that is, well, if the supply is low, say we're going for Trey Smith, or pick your offensive lineman, Mekhi Becton or whomever, Zeitler, whoever. The supply is less than the demand. So those guys' price just went up. It's called cap inflation. And with the price going up on something like that, where there's not a lot of supply to meet the demand, you're treading water. You're staying about the same. Are you going to pay him more? Yeah. But you're competing against, 31 other teams that are trying to do the same thing. So to me, it's the only teams it really, really helps are the teams that are trying to get underneath the cap. And there's 5 or 6 that are over the cap right now.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it a little less distance that they have to go. Now, the Saints still have a huge distance to go, but that's the difference. Now, the approach you're taking of identifying all the positions, let's fill the roster by position, where do we need to find people, is a good one.
Yeah, I think that's a really important factor here. Let's kind of start with this. I have all the positions, and it's at a certain point you just need bodies, and that's the important factor here. So
you're going to fill a 94-man roster,
or
90-man roster. Yeah.
So there are a lot of players that I don't believe will be returning. I'm guessing I'll probably be wrong on a couple of them because a couple of them are like fringe guys. It's like I'm not 100% sure, but this is just kind of where my brain is. I have the Vikings not retaining, and this is where the spice comes into play. I don't think Sam Darnold, Nick Mullens, or Daniel Jones are going to end up returning. I think Jones is going to end up with a starting level contract somewhere, and I think he's going to take it, and I don't blame him one bit. Brandon Powell, Johnny Munt, Dalton Reisner, Jeremy Flax, who was on IR this year, so it may not fully register, but he's technically a free agent. Dan Feeney, Cam Robinson, Jerry Tillery, Pat Jones II, Kamu Grugier-Hill, Stephon Gilmore, Shaquille Griffin, and Cam Bynum. I don't believe any of these guys will be returning, but I do believe they will have some guys re-signed. Ryan Wright, I have 1 year, $1 million. Theo Jackson, 1 year, $1.2 million, because he's a restricted free agent. Cam Akers, 1 year, $1.5 million. Fabian Moreau, 1 year, $1.79. Jihad Ward, 1 year, $2.5. David Questenberry, 1 year, $1.5. Jonathan Bullard, 1 year, $3 million. Trent Sherfield, 1 year, $1.79 million. Byron Murphy Jr., I do have the Vikings extending him 4 years, $72 million, $18 million a year, with a salary cap hit of $7 million in 2025. Now remember, Justin Jefferson's cap hit was under $7 million last year. So that's pretty common. And Aaron Jones, 2 years, $9 million, with a cap hit of $4 million in 25. That includes the $800,000 that would be carried over from that signing bonus. So these contracts have a grand total of $25.28 million in salary cap hits, But because the Vikings already have 53 players on their roster, you get to subtract the bottom 10 salaries from the roster because you're adding 10 more players on. So that's $16.52 million that comes off of the salary cap. $46.8 million is what we have to play with going into free agency. I do not have the Vikings doing any kind of adjusting when it comes to any kind of restructures, cap casualties. I think Ed Ingram probably gets cut, but it's unless you desperately need cap space, I don't think they cut him until at the end of training camp. They'll give him one more training camp to see, hey, are you worth keeping around? And if the answer is no, which at this point it probably isn't, then they cut him and they get the same salary cap savings at the end of August as they do in March. So because he's a guy, fourth-year player on an expiring rookie contract, I don't think they do anything with him. Now, that might be controversial, but they did the same thing with Armon Watts, who was making like $2.6 million. They waited until final cuts, determined he wasn't going to be on the team anymore, and they got rid of him. So I think that they'll do the same thing with that Ingram. I don't think they're going to get rid of CJ Ham, which we could argue they probably should, but he's a core special teams guy, and he's a captain. Sometimes you just pay a couple $1,000,000 so you can have that kind of guy on your roster. Is that a smart move? Your mileage may vary, but I don't think they're getting rid of him. So we have $46.8 million going into free agency, and the Vikings still have a significant amount of needs to fill. Quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, 2 interior offensive line spots, edge, defensive tackle, inside linebacker, safety, and 2 cornerback positions. You can...
Where's the interior O-line?
I have 1 right guard, 1 backup. That's what I think are needs. And I think your mileage may vary on that because there may be a preference to replace Bradbury, a preference to replace Brandel, but I'm not considering those needs. And I don't think the Vikings will be considering those needs either. And I think that's a distinguishable factor that you may disagree with, and I think that's okay. But I don't think that they're going to see it that way.
I think they've indicated they're going for verticality, where they can get vertical with both the interior offensive line and the interior defensive line. And by vertical, I mean pushing guys backwards, not getting pushed backwards. I think they plan to solve it that way, but I could be wrong. I've been wrong many times before.
See, this is where deciphering those comments from O'Connell and Adolfo-Mensah after the season are very interesting because, one, I think O'Connell's comments were based off of pure emotion, which nobody can blame him. I think Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's comments were more targeted to give some ambiguity, like, hey, we want to improve the interior offensive line. It's going to be a focus for us, but that doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the way you want it. And I'm not with you that I think they're going to make that idea a heavy priority. I think it's going to be a priority, but I just think you and I are going to differ on how they're going to get that done. And I'm intrigued to hear Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's press conference at the Combine to see if he says anything. What's really interesting is a lot of times you get nothing from those because it's media people not from Minnesota that are asking those questions. And then he does a side stuff with the beat reporters. But I think it's really interesting to kind of parse this whole offensive line thing out. Because I think what I believe, what you believe, and what the Vikings believe could all easily be 3 different things. And we genuinely don't know. We know they want improvement, but how? And I think Kwesi's comments saying that basically it's not linear, that it can come from year over year growth. It could come from adding additional players, better coaching. There's so many different factors that go into improvement. I think they might just go look at the first 6 weeks and like, Darisaw was healthy. This line was great. Yeah, we weren't perfect, but it was great. So that's going to be interesting. But for right now, I think they need to improve right guard. And if you view that left guard and center need to be improved right now, I understand that opinion. I don't believe they're going to do it. And that's how I approach this.
Now, the problem is half the league is squawking they want to improve their offensive line. And we know some that are much worse than ours. And the same for probably the defense. So, and it's a supply and demand problem, and it's going to be difficult. How Kwesi negotiates that is going to be interesting.
Yeah,
and I'm looking forward to those press conferences as well.
Absolutely. We talked about that on Monday's show because the offensive line, it's an epidemic. There just aren't good offensive linemen out there. And when you find them, they're going to get paid buku bucks. So are they going to be willing to pay buku bucks for Trey Smith? I'm not convinced of that. I think they want Trey Smith. Everybody should want Trey Smith. He's a very, very good football player. But $21 million? Is that how you want to spend your salary cap space? That's a really important question that the Vikings need to answer themselves, because that's what it's going to cost. It's going to cost top of the market money. And I think that's going to be fun to watch play out. I don't have them getting Trey Smith. What I do have is I do have them getting a big improvement at right guard. I have them adding Teven Jenkins from the Chicago Bears, 4 years, $48 million, the $5.2 million cap hit in 2025. I think he's a mauler. I loved him coming out of college when he played at Oklahoma State. I thought he could kick inside, but I wanted him to be able to fail a guard, and he kind of did. But he's been really good at guard after failing a tackle. Excuse me. And I think that he would be a force in the interior, and he can do, not only will he not be overpowered on the interior, he's agile enough to handle the zone stuff that the Vikings want to run, which is huge. You have to be able to run that zone stuff. And that's why I'm out on Tyler Booker as a draft pick, because I just don't think he can do that. And I think that's really, really interesting if they end up bringing him in. But it's $12 million a year average annual value. He may end up getting a little bit more, but that was how I kind of predicted it. And now we're going to go to the secondary, because I have them signing 3 guys in the secondary. First one, Charvarius Ward, cornerback from San Francisco, 3 years, $42 million, so $14 million a year with a cap hit of $6.2 million in 2025. I think Ward's a really good football player. I think there's a lot that you can still get from him. Even though he's 29 years old, he can play man, he can play zone. He can play off. He can play man match. He can do a little bit of everything for you. And I think he's a fringe top 10 type of corner. Had a little bit of a down year last year due to an injury and the death of his child, which is traumatic for anybody, let alone now you have to go play football on national television. It makes it for a different kind of pain. So I'm not too worried about any of those factors, especially since he said, hey, I'm leaving San Francisco because I need to get out of California. And I think he's going to be a really good player. The other cornerback I have the Vikings signing is Jeff Okudah. 1 year, $5 million, capped at $3.5 million in 25. He was the 3rd overall pick of the Lions. I believe it was 2019. Might have been 2020. I might have my years off. But he never really lived up to those expectations. But he's been a solid hand. Like a solid corner 2, corner 3. And I think having that guy in your roster is a valuable piece. He's like a more athletic version of Shaq Griffin, where I think he can do some of the man stuff, and he can do, he can play press, he can play off, and he can do a lot of those things. He's never going to be great for you, but you're not asking him to be great. And signing him for 1 year, $5 million, I think is important to the conversation we're going to have. And I think that's that part when we get to like the draft, it's going to make a little more sense. I did forget to mention one player that we re-signed. Did I mention that we re-signed Aaron Jones?
Yeah, you did.
Okay, perfect. Last guy in the secondary, Jevon Holland. 4 years, $72 million, cap hit of $7.2 million in 2025. I think they're not going to be able to resist the versatility of Holland. They're not going to be able to resist what he can do. And I like Holland a lot. I think he can do a little bit of everything with him, and that versatility is so huge with a Brian Flores defense. And I think secondary is going to be, they're going to spend money on them like they did with edge rusher last year. They're going to spend assets and dollars on this group to fix it. And I think Holland is going to be a really big part of that. We do have, so let's see, 5 more signings. None of them are big money. And I think that's where The Vikings are going to end up with about $22 million in cap space when this is done, because that's going to go to the draft, and that's going to go to, hey, maybe you need to sign a couple extensions, and you're going to need in-season capital. So they're not going to just completely clean out. They're going to need a wide receiver 3. Robert Woods, 1 year, $2 million. And wide receiver 4. And I think Woods is just a versatile kind of guy. He's played in this scheme for years and thrived with the Los Angeles Rams. And I think he's the kind of player that can help elevate guys like Jordan Addison and Justin Jefferson with his experience and his acumen, and being able to help out those guys grow to a different level. Plus, he's just a depth guy. I think if he has to step in as wide receiver 3, he's fine. Like, you could probably survive not having Jordan Addison for 3 games with Jefferson, Naylor, and Robert Woods. Not a great lineup, but you survived 2 games last year without Jordan Addison, and Jalen Naylor hadn't quite stepped up yet, and Hawkinson was out, and you won all those games. So I think that that's the kind of guy that would come in, not a lot of money, and be able to make an impact. The other guy on the offense, before we get back to the defensive side of the football, we need a backup quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo, 1 year, $4 million. 2 years, $7 million. Cap hit of $2.5 million in 2025. Look, is Jimmy Garoppolo good? No. Are backup quarterbacks usually good? No. But Garoppolo, if you need him to start a few games, he can be competent. And he's got a good head on his shoulders. He's played in an offense very similar to this. He's going to have spent a year with Sean McVay. He can help J.J. McCarthy with a lot of things because he's seen a lot. He played with Tom Brady, Bill Belichick, Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay. He's done a little bit of everything. And I think having that guy in your room is a good thing. You want a guy like that in your quarterback room, because he can help elevate things that others can't. And the Vikings already have Brett Rippon on the roster, so now you have 3 quarterbacks. J.J. McCarthy, time to go. Like, the whole idea is, I'm seeing in the comments, like, no to Garoppolo. You're not signing a backup quarterback to play. You're signing him for his brain, and if the backup quarterback has to play significant time, it's going to be like 23. Your season's done. Like, you're not going to have a Sam Darnold backup quarterback anymore. That was a lucky one-off. And I think there was more than luck that had to do with it, but you can't expect that to be the norm. And I think having a guy with a good brain who's been around the block and has seen a lot of things is a really good asset to your team. Like,
that's the whole idea of keeping Jones.
Mm-hmm.
If
I would love to keep Jones. I don't think he stays, because I think
he's probably going to sign a contract.
Yeah.
Because, again, the demand outweighs the supply when it comes to quarterbacks, as well as offensive linemen and defensive linemen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, Dave, we have a couple more. Edge rusher Dante Fowler, 1 year, $4 million. Cap hit of $2.5 million in 2025. I like Dante Fowler. I think he's a good player, and you're gonna need edge rush depth. This team needs edge rush depth. They have the top 3, but edge rusher 3 had over 500 snaps. Edge rusher 4 only had 452 because Pat Jones was basically hurt for 3 games. That's probably like 550 if he's not hurt. So you have to have depth at edge. Fowler's not great, but he's good. He's going to give you enough. And I think having that player is a good thing. So you have Fowler who can do a little bit for you. And I think he's the kind of guy that can get you like 6-7 sacks. It's pretty good for an edge 4. So $4 million, you don't love that, but you have to pay veteran players. Like, you can't always get them for super cheap. 2 more defenders. We get a defensive tackle, but they miss on all the high price, like, interior pass rushers. They get Roy Lopez, 1 year, $3 million, just straight up. Cap hit at $3 million. Roy Lopez he's a really good penetrator. He's got a little bit of pass rush juice, but he's more of a nose tackle. That allows Harrison Phillips to kind of kick more towards like a defensive end role. And now you keep your run game. The Vikings need to be able to stop the run. This is going to help them do that. And I think Roy Lopez is a better addition than Jerry Tillery. Plus, now you have rotation because Taki Taimani and Jonathan Bullard and Jalen Redmond, Levi Drake Rodriguez, if he becomes anything, now you have guys you can rotate in and out, and you can feel comfortable rotating them in and out. Keeping fresh legs is huge on the interior, especially late in games when the running game can honestly wear defensive tackles out. I think Roy Lopez is a good football player. He's not going to grab any headlines. He's not going to be like this incredible difference maker, but he's a good ass football player. Those are the kind of guys I want on my team. Last guy, not a sexy name, but not all free agent signings are sexy. Linebacker Devin Bush, 1 year, $1.5 million. Kind of busted as the 10th overall pick. I believe he was 2018, maybe he was 2017, but I think he's a good enough guy as like your linebacker 3B, your special teams ace, and maybe you can see something grow out of Brian Asamoah. You need a guy. I don't think they're going to bring back Camus Grugier-Hill. So you need a guy to fill that Camus Grugier-Hill role, and I think Devin Bush can do it. I think not every signing is going to be sexy. Not every signing is going to be what you want. And I don't even love all of these signings, but I'm trying to make a prediction to try and figure out what I think the Vikings will do. And I think it's going to look something like this. Dave, what do you think? What do you think of this haul?
It's very you.
What does that mean?
That you're going not the big ticket items, not the focusing on where I think the Vikings are going, and you're shopping in the Dollar Tree store in the $5 movie bin, which there will be some of that. It's got to be. You've got to do that. And you hope you find somebody that is productive, and especially in a backup role that works. But yes, you've thought it out pretty soundly, and you did a good job of that.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's the big thing is we got the big price guy. Jevon Holland's a crown jewel. He is the centerpiece of this free agency class. Set like $18 million a year. Teven Jenkins, $12 million a year. Charvarius Ward, $14 million a year. So it's not like they're not spending money, but I think they're going to prioritize giving big money to like 3 guys and then sign other guys to more like 1 or 2 year deals versus tying a bunch of guys up. Because historically within this regime, and things could change here because of how Kwesi Adofo-Mensah now has money to spend because he's kind of cleaned the cap up. Maybe he is willing to start giving away multiple contracts. Maybe he's willing to get 1 or 2 more guys on a big deal. But I'm not convinced he is yet. So that's why you have 3 guys with big money, a cornerback, a safety, and an offensive guard. And the rest of them are, hey, we got to fill holes. And we got to fill them with quality players at good prices. And I think this kind of does that. Now,
well, are you going to see the problem with this is, are you going 2 years in a row fixing defense?
Yeah, the offense really doesn't need
guard.
They really don't need fixing.
Other than the interior line, yes.
And that your mileage is going to vary on how much that needs to be fixed. We've talked about we need to rehash it, but like the offense is in a good spot. The defense is losing like 7 potential starters. Like Grenard, Van Ginkel, Harrison Phillips, Blake Cashman, Josh Metellus are the only guys currently under contract. And I'm not going to include Harrison Smith because I think he retires. So that means you have to replace 6 defensive starters. On offense, you have to replace right guard and maybe running back. I think Aaron Jones comes back, which is why he was on this exercise. But yeah, I think it's going to be more defense heavy just because of the amount of guys that are still in free or going to be free agents.
All right. But now, let's move to the draft.
Yep. So the Vikings have $22 million in salary cap space after this wave of free agency, which they're going to have to dedicate around 7 or 8 million of that to the NFL draft. It gives them 15 to play with for other moves. Now remember, the practice squad counts, so it's going to be about $4 or $5 million. Anybody who's on IR counts, and they might want to do an extension or two. So they can find a way to get more cap space. They can maneuver some guys. They can restructure Brian O'Neill. They can restructure Jonathan Grenard and just move money around. They can
lower the cap hit on the new free agent signings and push money out.
I lowered it to where these guys are pretty much getting the minimum, and then it's just a signing bonus. So maybe you do less of a signing bonus and you can save a little bit there. But I tried to utilize accuracy with it instead of just like, oh, it's going to be like a $14 million cap at year one. That's not how the NFL does things. It's a small cap at year one and then it raises. Mm-hmm. So the NFL draft, there are only 3 true need positions where they need to fill it. They need 1 interior offensive lineman, they need a tight end, and they need a running back. As far as you got to remember, Dave, I'm talking about bodies. That as far as needs on what you need. Well, I saw you laughing up in the corner.
I wasn't laughing. I was cringing.
It's very interesting to kind of parse it all out, and you want to go into the NFL draft without having many needs because it gives you the opportunity to draft based on talent. And I do think that you could argue that cornerback should still be in here because Jeff Okudah is only on the 1-year deal. You get Charvarius Ward, you get Byron Murphy, you have Mekhi Blackman. So you have a top 3, but you can't count on Blackman. And yeah, I'd still want a guy. I'd like to get a guy with size and length, and that's what we end up doing. We got East Carolina cornerback Jevon Revel Jr. He's coming off a torn ACL, and with this pool of cornerbacks you don't have to play him right away if he's not 100% ready. He should be ready for training camp because it was just a clean ACL tear in September. So he should be 100% ready to go. But if he doesn't have to play much, that's okay. You're not drafting for now, you're drafting for later. You're drafting for the future. And I think one of the interesting things with how I kind of approach this is we end up trading back with the Washington Commanders, get back to pick 29, and we ended up acquiring pick 79 in the process. So now we have 5 draft picks, 3 of them in the top 100. We're feeling a little better about the position that we're in. So we go to pick 79, and we need a long-term running back. We need somebody that we can trust. We need somebody that we can grow with. And that's going to be DJ Giddens, the running back out of Kansas State. I think he's very similar to Aaron Jones. He's not very top-heavy as far as fast. He doesn't have that top gear, but he's got a good 3rd and 4th gear. He's never going to get to 5th. And I think that's okay, especially with how the Vikings like to run with their running game, the wide zone, the outside zone stuff. He's going to get you chunks of 20 and 30. He's going to be able to break up some 40, 50, and 60s. It's just going to be rare for him to hit that long home run. But you're getting him at 79 and not 29. And that's the difference. You take a guy in the first round, you better be able to hit a home run. Take a guy at 79, you feel a little bit more comfortable. And I think that zone type back is going to be really nice for the Vikings to be able to maximize some of that run game stuff. 97, this is where I feel comfortable taking Deion Walker, the defensive tackle out of Kentucky. He's a really weird prospect because he's 6'7", 342, and he's all top heavy with no butt. And if you've ever heard Bill Belichick talk about how he evaluates trench play, he's like, I look at their butts. You got to have sand in the pants. Like, you just do, because you generate power with your legs. And Walker does not have a lot of power with his legs. It's upper body. But he moves incredibly well for a guy his size. He's got rare size at being over 6'7". And even if he does not get low with super good leverage, I think you can find a way to use him and grow and develop that skill set to be able to get a good player out of him. You just have a lot less pressure and stress of doing so at 97 than you would in the 1st or 2nd round. Like 97 is basically a 4th round pick because it's a compensatory pick. So I feel comfortable trying with Deion Walker at this spot. 139. I've heard that the Vikings might want to prioritize tight end a little bit. They did not get one in free agency. They stick with Josh Oliver, who is a cut candidate himself. I think more of an extension candidate, but that's just me. Texas Tech tight end Jalen Conyers. Conyers is kind of like a poor man's Tyler Warren. And if you know Tyler Warren, he's probably going to go top 10 in this draft. He was a high school quarterback. They were giving Conyers snaps at quarterback at Arizona State. He was throwing the ball at times. He's a big, tall guy, good mover in space, catch the ball up the seams. I think he could be an interesting tight end 3 developmental kind of guy. Maybe he can be a tight end 2 or and like a starter long-term. But you need to have that tight end 3. You don't have Nick Muse anymore. Johnny Munt in this situation is not coming back, and you need to have that guy. And I think Conyers is an interesting player to put in that spot because he's a high upside athlete. And I like taking bets on players like that. Lastly, pick 160, Miles Frazier, the offensive lineman, LSU. He's an interior guy. I thought he was really good at the Senior Bowl. He had a really good season for LSU. I like Clay Webb in this spot too, but I kind of knocked Clay Webb down a little bit in kind of my thought process because I came across some allegations that he had from his high school time that are pretty rough. I won't talk about them on here, but you can go look at them and you can kind of decide for yourself whether or not that's a player that you really want on your team. But Miles Frazier, I think, would be a really good add. And he's a guy that could maybe be a starter for you. I'm not going to tell you he's going to be a starter. He's a day 3 offensive lineman. We know how volatile those can be. But this is the type of day 3 offensive lineman I would like to take a bet on. I think Miles Frazier is a good football player. And he's worth the risk. What do you think on that, Dave?
Okay. I can't see drafting a tight end. You draft a tight end for their next team. We need one. Yes, I agree there. But I don't know if I want to waste a draft pick on him.
I've said that line before, and I agree with you, but I'm more apt to take the shot at tight end on day 3 for a tight end 3 and developmental guy than I would be taking a guy in the first round or the second round.
Oh, yeah. It's got to be, if you're going to take a tight end in those rounds, they got to be blue chippers. They're got to be sure bets. And those are so few and far between. At that level. And they still take time to develop.
Yeah. I think adding a guy, he's got a lot of experience in playing in multiple different offenses. So I'm fine with the bet of Conyers at 139, which is the first pick in round 5. But I understand. Tight end, like they need to figure out something at tight end 3. And I think they should probably try and find it as a young guy because Josh Oliver's entering year 7. TJ Hawkinson's entering year 7. And those guys, well, you want to have some youth developing. And getting a young guy, I think would be a good bet. Is it the best use with our limited draft capital? I think that's a really good discussion point. But I also think based on how everything kind of fell with how we handled free agency, I think you're in a good spot where tight end is one of your more pressing needs by the time you get to the selection, which is why I felt pretty comfortable with it and why I think the Vikings might feel the same way. But yeah, that is the Forno path of glory this offseason. And I don't necessarily think it's going to be the most popular. I don't think it's going to be completely agreeable, even though I think you should all agree with everything I say. This is how America works. You should agree with everything I say. No, you shouldn't. Have your own opinions, please. But I tried to do some realism with this. I think there are other paths that can easily be done. You can add a different interior offensive lineman. You can maybe not add Jevon Holland and use that money for somebody else. You can maneuver a little bit, but the general constructs with how this is set up, I think, is a really good baseline for what an offseason.
It's more realistic. We're not going to probably get the Dolman out of Atlanta, Trey Smith, and whoever I've got as the top left guard.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to happen. There's not now. But if you can get high enough that are better than what you have, you go grab them.
Yeah, and Teven Jenkins is going to be offensive guard 4 on the market, which is still a good football player. It's still a major improvement for this team. So, I like it.
That's the only one that may go back to his own team.
That it is possible, yes.
Chicago's hurting for offensive line, and Trey Jenkins is the only one that's worth a damn.
Yeah. You know what they should do is they should re-sign Coleman Shelton. He was really bad last year. But
okay.
Yeah.
Where's Jenkins? Jenkins is number 3 on my board for top guards. Interior O-line. And he plays left guard.
Yeah. Jenkins historically has played on the right side. So I think you can feel comfortable putting him in at right guard. I would want to theoretically just replace right guard because I do think they're going to keep left guard and center the same. That I'm not. If they replace it, I'll be pleasantly surprised. But in that situation, you don't want
somebody like Zeitler.
Zeitler's 35. I think
playing good football.
Is he going to play good football next year? I have questions about that. I thought about Zach Martin, but both he and Zeitler have a pretty decent injury history. So that's kind of where I had hesitation.
Oh, Martin is, he's slightly better than our guys.
Martin was an all-pro 2 years ago. He was hurt last year.
But I'm talking last year. His grades, they were low to mid-60s.
But that is the path of glory. Thank you guys for joining. Thank you guys for listening and watching. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, do all those fun things for us, and hit that little bell at the top of your screens and get those notifications for when we go live. And we're going to try and get something recorded tomorrow so we can have an episode next week, maybe 2. We'll see what time allows as I fly to Mexico on Friday afternoon. Oh boy, I can't wait. We are going to have some fun. I'm going to drink a lot of Tecate, and it's going to be a good time. But we'll be back, and if you hopefully
see Darren, you got to say hi.
I absolutely will, and we will. We'll hopefully have a show also on Friday discussing a lot of Vikings football and the NFL scouting combine. And don't forget, 2 old bloggers, 1 more week on Saturday because Darren's a little stinky butt. And it had to ruin all my promotion for Sunday. But it will be out on this Saturday, and then it will transition to Sunday until the beginning of football season. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. Let us know in the comments what you think, what you would change, how you would go about it, because I guarantee you, I'll probably get a few right, but there will probably be quite a few that don't end up hitting because stuff happens. It's free agency. I'm Tyler. He's Dave. SKOL Vikings.
Hey, and one last thing. Let's all head over to watch Vikings Report with Drew, Ted, and Chris. It's their final episode tonight, starting at the top of the hour. What do we say? SKOL Vikings.
SKOL Vikings.
Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to get notifications. It helps us grow this community that we all love our Minnesota Vikings. And on behalf of Tyler Forness and myself, Dave Stefano, thank you so dearly for watching the Real Forno Show. SKOL, everyone!